Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Michigan Cannabis Market Trends and Economic Forecast webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Travis Copenhaver. I am a partner at Vicente's Michigan office, joined today by Andrew Livingston. Andrew is our Director of Economics and Research with Vicente. Andrew, how's things going today?
It's doing pretty well in Denver. I'm excited to talk about the Michigan market. Excited to kind of analyze some of the trends we've been seeing over the past few years, and really kind of look at how things are expanding. I'm going to wait a little longer for more people to join, as it seems as more people are joining. And so during that time, I'll mention a little bit about kind of the economics department. So we've been a part of the firm since really probably 2014, 2015, analyzing cannabis markets in Michigan and in states and a little bit internationally. So really kind of looking at cannabis market movement, consumer trends, supply and demand analysis, and really helping businesses navigate what is a complex patchwork of state laws so that they can, understand and identify opportunities in different states. This is a follow-up webinar. We've done a few for other states, and really wanted to include Michigan as one of the largest medical and adult use markets in the country, and also one that's gone through a turbulent last few years. And so, things are stabilizing a bit, but we'll talk a little bit further about how operators can kind of take advantage of the Michigan market. What are we likely to see in the future? And, what have we learned from the past in ways that, as well as other states, on how to actually set up your business in a way to make it through what is a pretty lean time and low prices. Although things are stabilizing, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I think still people are joining, and probably wait another minute or so.
Yeah, no problem. And I know one of the things you and I have spoken about a lot, Andrew, is that the Michigan regulators provide quite a bit of data, which really allows us to kind of pull some of that data out and analyze it, which is what we're going to be spending quite a bit of time doing while we're waiting for folks here. But ultimately, while we're running through this, please feel free to add questions into the chat. We're going to be kind of talking about the big question of, is now a good time to enter the Michigan market? What should you be thinking about if you're currently in the Michigan market? And we're happy to kind of go over both the specifics and trends that we're seeing on our end.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to give it probably another minute, and then we can get going. We're going to be presenting, quite a number of different graphs and trends, and really talking about those. And then, we'll have some of this information as well as the slides available after the presentation. So for anyone who is looking for these sorts of things, or wants to include them in any of your pitch decks or investor presentations, we're happy to help clients with that, and really help them understand the Michigan market so they can take advantage of that. All right, so let's for a second jump in. So, as you all know, Vicente, or hopefully know Vicente, we're a premier cannabis and psychedelics law firm. I've not yet done one of these market presentations on psychedelics yet, but that will be probably coming in the future. With offices in California, Colorado, Florida, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, and Texas. Really across the country, analyzing cannabis markets, helping clients, navigate these laws and policies, open up businesses and get licensed. So they can provide regulated, high quality cannabis products and services to the community. So again, Travis did a little bit of the introduction. Thank you, Travis. It's been a pleasure working with you all of these years, both before you were at the firm and now as a partner in our Michigan office, and kind of really looking forward to deep diving a little bit further into the Michigan market. All right, so let's first talk about what the total Michigan cannabis market looks like, and the percentage that's medical and adult use. So here you can see the Michigan market really started in 2020. It opened the very, very end of 2019, passed in 2018, and worked on that campaign. I actually did some of the projections for MPP at that time, and I underestimated how much Michigan cannabis consumers would consume, which is good because it's more revenue flowing through the system. But over time, we've seen Michigan market grow into one of the largest medical and adult use cannabis markets in the country, with over 2.25 billion in sales in 2022. And we're projected to hit over 3 billion in 2023, when essentially you look at the first 8 months of sales data, which is what we have so far, and look at the year-over-year change from 2022 and project that forward on average through the end of the year. We're already at almost 2 billion, and then in the first just 8 months. And so this is kind of really, really exciting. We haven't seen the same type of tapered growth, essentially, slowing growth as we've seen in other states like Massachusetts, Colorado, which is actually down, and some of the more mature Western markets. Further, the adult use market is really taking over the medical market, as the medical market has actually declined pretty significantly over the last few years, and now represents less than 5% of the total cannabis market in Michigan. So over 95% of the market is in the adult use program, and since the start of 2023, we've seen adult use sales grow by over 55%, where medical sales have declined by over 2/3.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that reflected on the license and ops side too. I know in quite a few markets where my clients operate, we often will be dropping off our medical licenses when they're no longer needed. Retail side, a lot of folks will just provide additional discounts to card holders, and pretty much the vast majority of medical retail licenses that I still help clients maintain are usually in local markets where holding that provisioning center license is kind of a requirement to hold the adult use cannabis license as well, or in some markets where medical still kind of overperforms compared to the rest of the state.
Yeah, and in many states, particularly as you have two different supply streams, and so there's a little bit of complications there. If you're dealing with primarily just a retail level tax, which Michigan is, you can give those discounts, to equalize out that price for patients, and really kind of provide them the same level of service by and large, without as many licensing and back-end administrative and compliance complications. So we've seen that in Oregon, we've seen it in Nevada, a number of other states, where medical licenses have been dropping, medical patients have been declining. Now, there still are medical patients that keep it around, but it's in some cases it's an identity card more than it is a card that's actually used for actually purchasing from the medical side. So.
And I think another factor that adds just maybe a little bit of context to this particular data point is, Michigan at the wholesale side through our grow and processor licenses can do equivalent exchanges of inventory between the medical and adult use kind of license types. Retailers can do this as well, but I think a lot of medical only growers and medical only processors are taking advantage of that, where they'll take their medical product and it's getting into the adult use market through those transfer process. Cannabis regulatory is allowing ultimately be an endpoint sale like in an adult use store as well.
Yeah, and that makes it even more of a reason for most of the inventory to start accumulating on the adult use side, where most of the both medical and adult use consumers actually are. So with all of this, we're really going to focus on the adult use side of things as we are looking at these projections, because it makes sense to analyze the 95+% of the market rather than the less than 5%. So let's talk about what adult use sales look like. So you can see here the adult use sales starting in the end of 2019 up until the most recent data we have through August. For both flowers, shake trim, infused flower pre-rolls, concentrates, vape cartridges, edibles, topicals. And then I also wanted to show a linear trend line. And the reason this is kind of key is, anything above that trend line is essentially expanding at more, the market is expanding at more than what it was on average over time. And so what we're seeing here is Michigan is not slowing down in its growth. If anything, the last few months have actually been above the linear trend line for that growth. Now, some of that is explained by the fact that it's the summer, and sales often grow in those summer months. We often have that peak in April for 420, a little bit of decline in May and June as the weather is not as nice, uptick in some of the highest sales in June and July, and often a tapering off into the fall and an uptick in December as people want to consume cannabis over the holidays, or maybe pick up some cannabis before they drive to a more rural area of the state for Christmas dinner. And so that's we often see that sort of same type of trend, and that's kind of really evident in 2022. But what's great is that the summer of 2023 has actually exceeded some of that. So the market is not slowing down on the adult use side, which is really amazing to see. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is so phenomenal from a dollar perspective, because prices are declining, right? So that means actually volume is more than compensating for that. So whenever we analyze these sorts of things, right, you look at price, you look at volume, and then you look at value. So the dollars that have actually been sold, because you can have a stabling off of actually sales value, and that could actually just be because while volume of sales is increasing, it's increasing at the same rate as prices are declining. But when value is still increasing while prices are declining, that means that the volume of sales is actually compensating for that even more. And we'll talk about that a little further in the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about market share by product category. What's going up, what's going down. So flower, you've seen a little bit of a decline since the first quarter of 2023, relatively stable at about 45 to 50%. But we're seeing a little bit of that tapering off. Same type of thing with vape cartridges. In the end of 2021 into 2022, we were over 20%. Now we're just under 20%. It's not a major decline as far as a percentage of the market. And edibles also a little bit of decline. And most of these slight declines are actually occurring because these infused flower and pre-rolls, or what the state calls, I think it's compound concentrates. Really, it's like moon rocks, and a term I'd actually never heard of, tarantula, which is, I guess you take bud and you coat it in cannabis oil, and then you dust it in keef so it gets extra furry, and then
we have quite a few names for it. I first learned of them as tarantula legs. But yeah, I think a part of maybe some of this data as well is those infused, pre-rolls are a big part of what is making up that product category at the consumer end. You're kind of looking at those pre-rolls that are infused kind of being sold in a very similar manner to the traditional, what would get captured in the flower sale, which is just traditional pre-rolls. So it's when you look at those numbers kind of shifting, I do wonder, like, it's interesting to kind of see that category capturing more and more products as kind of our processors figure out how to get those products to market. But from the consumer's kind of perspective, I go into some of these stores and you see all these different pre-rolls available, and sometimes it's hard to even tell which ones are the infused and which aren't when you're in there. So
yeah, and it could just be that a lot of people have extra keef around, and they're just tossing it into the pre-rolls to make them a little extra strong, and so then they count as that compound concentrate. Now, that being said, every adult use product category has seen increases in both value and volume of sales. So even though you see some of these declining, that's only because it's the percentage of the market. For the market's increasing, and every category is increasing in both value and volume, even as prices decline in almost all of these categories. And infused flower and pre-rolls show the fastest growth over these last 2 years. Topicals are a tiny percentage of the market, as they often are in many states. And concentrates are declining a bit in the percentage of the market, but that could also be, essentially operators probably looking at some of these prices and saying, they're making the smart decision of, Our flower prices are declining. Our concentrates prices are declining. Hey, why don't we just like combine the two, put it in a new format that's super strong and kind of interesting, and people don't get on, you know, the non-regulated market as much. And then let's sell it for better margins. And, you know, consumers have been reacting to that in ways that they're like, yeah, we want, like, you know, loaded fries. In this case, we want, you know, our loaded pre-rolls. And that's been a great idea, right? You know, so it's clearly like there's extra inventory that people have. As you know, some of the lower quality concentrates, maybe some of the lower quality flour, you know, and how to juice it up. You combine the two, and you make a new product class. So that's a really, you know, good example of the innovation and adapting to what is tightening margins in the Michigan cannabis space. You essentially create new products. Let's talk a little bit about licensing. So, you know, here we can see the growth in licensing since the end of 2019. There's a gap there. That's just because Cannabis Regulatory Agency had a little bit of a gap in their data. It's just a few months, and it's pretty clear. You can see that, you know, you can connect those dots. Nothing really wild happened there. There was just a little bit of a data gap. And what you can see is, you know, retailers have been growing in a pretty linear way. Now to over 700 adult use retailers. And the Class C marijuana grower, the largest grow license, you know, has also continued to increase over time. You know, in a way that, you know, we can really see, obviously there's some bumps in here, you know, things like that. But over the last about year or so, they've been trending at a similar pace between the Class C and the retailer licenses. And that's a good sign, because you know, you want to kind of have that equalization of supply and demand. We'll talk about that a little further.
Yeah, it's funny as well, Andrew. The unfortunately, the new numbers for the end of September just got released before we did these slides. We are currently up to 729 retail licenses and nice. 827 Class Cs. So, you know, still definitely showing that upward trajectory in even the most recent numbers as of September 30th. So.
Yeah, and you know, we've seen this pretty significant, you know, continued uptick, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the retail side when we get to that section. But you know, new stores are continuing to open, and so, you know, new stores represent two types of demand. So there's the wholesale demand that comes as the store needs to stock its shelves, right? So there's a certain amount of induced demand that's going to happen regardless of how well that store actually does. And then there's the consumer demand at those new stores in places where, you know, maybe it's a more rural location, or it's a new spot on a different side of town where consumers now have better access. And then as those consumers, you know, start purchasing all the product on the shelves, those stores then have to kind of reorder. So there's a little, you know, as you get a lot of new stores, there's a certain amount of induced demand, and then you'll start seeing that repurchasing. And that demand flow kind of upstream to the cultivators and manufacturers. All right, let's talk a little bit about, you know, those retailers and what we're seeing as far as the number of Class A growers and excess growers and all of those. So you can see, you know, I stack these. You can see it's a little easier to see as far as where all those licenses are. And, you know, I'll show this in a slightly different way in a moment as far as the number of plants, because that's really kind of what matters. But what we can see here is that, you know, most of these growers are Class C, so they're mostly the largest, you know, number of plants. And Travis, can you remind everyone for a moment, you know, how large those licenses can be, and,
sure.
and how many licenses someone can have, and kind of, you know, if you want to be the largest grower you can, kind of what the process is for that.
Yeah, of course. So on the adult use side, it's a little confusing because we do use the Class ABC kind of label for both medical and adult use. So specifically for adult use cultivation facilities, we have three sizes: Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A is a 100 plant count grow. Class B is a 500 plant count grow, and Class C is a 2,000 plant count grow. The statute itself limits adult use cultivation owners to 5 licenses for cultivation by default. So your kind of standard first kind of peak is a 5 Class C cultivation. That would give you, you know, 5 numbers of up to 2,000 plants, so a 10,000 plant cap by default. We have slightly different plant counts on the medical side. I won't list all those out to confuse anyone. I'm happy to give you those plant count numbers if you need them. But basically, in order to get a cultivation facility on the adult use side larger than that 10,000 plant count, you can start applying for what the CRA calls an excess grow license. An excess grow is also a 2,000 plant count license. You can qualify for that once you have hit your 5 license cap on the adult use cultivation license type. And then for every 2 Class C medical licenses that you are operating on the medical side of our industry, you can add an excess grow license. So for every 2 on medical, you get an additional excess all the way up. I'm not sure what the largest is right now, but there's not technically an endpoint. You just keep going on that 2-to-1 ratio as you continue to add chunks of 2,000 plants to your count.
Yeah, and that might explain too why people are continuing on the medical side, just because you have to do that in order to expand on the adult use, which is kind of silly in some ways, right? If medical sales are declining and patients are declining there, it seems odd to have to boost up medical supply so much. But if you can also transfer medical supply to adult use, it's kind of a little bit of like you're in one pocket and shift to the other pocket. Obviously there's some complications there, and these are complications if clients need to work with them that, Travis has experience with and happy to help out with. So yeah, as far as kind of the determination for all of these, thanks Travis for getting into it, because it's not always clear, as far as what these types of licenses are.
Yeah, there's definitely some math to do. But yeah, like you said, a lot of the businesses that I work with that are holding those Class C medical licenses on the medical side for the excess grow qualification, or they're taking advantage of a equivalent exchange between the 2 markets in almost every experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go into supply and demand for a second and get into some of the real detail. So as I promised, right? It's not just looking at the number of licenses, but you have to really look at is authorized plants. Right. So while there are Class A and Class B marijuana growers, the vast majority of marijuana plants that have been authorized to be grown. And so this is really just looking at the licenses and looking at the number of plants they can grow. And, we'll talk a little bit in a moment about, how much is actually grown and harvested. Most of that is grown under those Class C marijuana growers licenses and the excess growers. The micro businesses for the Class A micro businesses and the other micro businesses, constitute a very, very small percentage of the actual plants can be grown. But really we're looking at, what is this now? Almost 2 million plants authorized in the system. But then we also can look at harvested plants, right? So, at any one time, in between what is, clearly the fall harvests, we're harvesting anywhere from about 200,000, growing now up to, about 330,000 plants. And during the peak periods, we're hitting about, 400,000 plants in the fall of 2022. So these spikes are pretty significant. They are not nearly as I'll use the term catastrophic for the supply and demand spikes as we've seen in places like Oregon, right? Where you have such a high percentage of the market that's being grown outdoors that, seasonally so much inventory comes online that it's hard for manufacturers to deal with it, hard for retailers to deal with it, and those really tank prices. These spikes look a lot more similar to what we see in Colorado, which is the vast majority of your operators are inside, or at least have light deprivation greenhouses harvesting regularly. And while there is an outdoor harvest that, adds some inventory to the market, a lot of that probably will go to concentrates. And it doesn't spike the supply so much that prices really have to plummet from there. And we'll talk to that a little bit about that in a moment. So, obviously that makes sense given the geography and the weather patterns of Michigan. But, this is kind of normal, and it's not nearly as dire as when I was doing consulting on this in Vermont, for instance, where, they're going to have a lot more outdoor growers as a percentage of the market. It's also important to remember that because Michigan is such a large market, right, when there are waves or shocks, it's essentially a much larger pool to absorb those shifts and shocks in, right? Some of the problems that happen when you're dealing with seasonal supply increases from outdoor harvest is when it occurs in a small market, and a big wave makes a lot of ripples in a small pool. Where Michigan being, a population over 10 million, a market that's now edging towards $3 billion, they can absorb some of those seasonal increases, particularly when they're not so extreme.
Sure. And on the consumer side as well, it does create quite a good kind of opportunity for good deals and things if folks are kind of watching these market trends. But yeah, no, I think we'll be excited to see. We've had a lot more outdoor cultivation in the last year that we're going to start capturing on this data over the next few months as we kind of get into October, November here.
Yeah, and and once we harvest in October, and then it dry and cure for a few weeks, product is ready in early December for everyone to buy in order to deal with their family during Christmas.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about adult use sales in those harvested plants. What we could see here is adult use sales during the period continue to increase. And that's the value of those sales. So even with those increases, the spikes that increase supply and reduce some prices, we're still seeing those sales continue to move upwards. And you can see here the little bit of spike in December, and obviously some increases in July and August. The trend of increased supply in harvested plants since Q1 2023 is increasing at a slightly higher pace than is adult use sales. And I matched these on both sides, so it's essentially $1,000 to a plant for this dynamic between the two sides of the graphs. So we are seeing supply increase a little bit faster than total sales, but not exorbitantly so. Things are still kind of trending in a way that is, the market is relatively in an equilibrium of growth. Again, positive. So let's talk a little bit about that inventory accumulation, because this is where we could see things go a little haywire. And if you want to see what things look like when they go haywire, I recommend looking at the Oregon biannual legislative reports on supply and demand. It's pretty easy to find online, and there you can see what real supply shocks look like. So what you could see is in last fall there was obviously the fall harvest. Almost to 450,000 plants were harvested in the month of October. Obviously, that declines in November, December, as most of those harvests occur at one time, and that puts inventory into the market in November, right? So you can see obviously the shock here occurs in November as the harvest occurred in October, and that was significant, but it's interesting, that inventory actually declined in December as that demand was able to eat some of it or smoke some of it. The best way to get rid of cannabis inventory is to light it on fire and inhale it. And exactly. So we see that inventory continuing to accumulate into Q1 2023, kind of leveling off, right? You see some decline in April as there's more demand, so some of that inventory that gets again smoked up. And then in May, again, a little reduction in demand as it's not as heavy of a market. I don't spend much time in Michigan in May, but I don't think it's as nice as it is in July and August. And obviously, as July and August come in, demand is increasing, and that inventory essentially isn't being accumulated in the same way. So the fact that we don't, we have ups and downs here, and downs in inventory accumulation, it's a great thing to see. Essentially, we are not over accumulating inventory in Michigan in such a way that we just have nowhere to put it. Right. We can, we have more demand. More demand is great. If people are cutting down on their supply, right, we do have, upwards of, over 300,000 pounds of accumulated inventory. That may be more than the market needs. I don't know back and forth, how much, gets transferred or moved. There is data on that, but didn't get into that level of detail here on this presentation.
Right. And I
But
think a big part of this too, Andrew, is, as we mentioned earlier, the industry really started in 2020. And now that the various stakeholders in different parts of this market have had experience with the ups and downs of these trends, they're clearly like predictable patterns, and you can kind of anticipate how things are going to happen. So, on the retail side, they can, stock and plan inventory projections and things accordingly. Same with, folks who are putting out harvests and things. I think a lot of folks, I've seen a lot more adaptation and anticipation of these kind of fall trends from a lot of my clients over the last few months compared to, what we were doing in 2021 and things. So.
Yeah, and Travis, absolutely. You can see some of that the adaptability here. From the flowers at retailers is relatively stable over time, right? There's been a little bit of an increase, but the retailers hold inventory, that they can, and we're not seeing things pile up on the shelves. What you could see if you look at the difference between the flower at growers and the flower at the processors, was that in from Q1 2023 to Q2, we saw a lot of that inventory move from the flowers, from the growers to the processors, right? You can see that pretty large increase that happened in the May of 2023 in accumulation. Most of that happened at the processors. So what's likely happening is, when you have too much inventory, the best thing to do with it is to turn it into a product that will last for longer. And that often means that you take some of your more mid-grade or lower quality flower, before it goes bad, you extract it, you turn it into concentrated distillate for vape pens, and for that, infused flower and pre-rolls. So, you can see some of that. And the good sign is that, since May of 2023, that inventory at the processors is being eaten up, right? It's getting moved to retailers. You can see some expansion in the number of inventory there at retailers, but it's being turned into other products. And clearly those consumers love those infused flower and pre-rolls and really like their vape pens and concentrates. And so that inventory is just being changed into a different format, and consumed by adult use consumers in Michigan. So again, that's great to see the adaptability there. And great to see the licensees kind of recognizing what consumers need and figuring out how to manage that inventory in a way that's not throwing the market into haywire. And also, more importantly, it's a value-added product, so you're getting a better margin on some of those kind of infused flower and pre-rolls than you are just straight on the concentrates or straight on the flower. Anything else, Travis, before we jump into product prices?
No, let's keep going.
All right, cool. So let's look at product prices. So, obviously there's some, craziness up and down in some of the data. There's also likely some issues with the data over time. But what we can see here is essentially a leveling off over time. So, flower is not at its lowest point, but is still really pretty low at about $3.15 a gram. And that's, looking at the average in 2023. And, what we're seeing is that, obviously some of the infused flower and pre-rolls have dropped, come up. Concentrates have been relatively stable. Vape cartridges actually increased a little bit in price in April, and then come down again. But if you could see this really from, over the last year, since September 2023, the market is relatively stabilized in terms of these prices, right? We're seeing some of those categories actually increase slightly. We're seeing, obviously the infused flower and pre-rolls, there's less volume that runs through, and so there's more kind of that scattered randomness when it comes to the ups and downs, more volatility when it comes to those prices. But we are seeing kind of that stabilization across a number of these different price categories. I didn't include edibles and topicals because the way that Michigan provides that data is in like fluid ounces and grams of the total product weight, which isn't really related much to the, if they gave it to me in milligrams, it'd be easier to convert. So
we'll ask if they can do that moving forward.
Stop doing
Andrew, before we get too deep into this slide, just for clarification, we have a question. Are these prices retail or wholesale on
these are retail prices? Yeah.
Retail prices.
These are retail prices. So this is really just looking at, Michigan provides great data on, retail sales in both value and volume. So to figure out product prices, you just do some division. And they provide that in terms of pounds, but that is in pounds at retail level. So wholesale is less than that, but yeah, we're dealing with quite low prices in Michigan, even lower than in Oregon and Colorado, but we are seeing them tick up a little bit. Back to those sort of levels. Massachusetts, I gave a presentation earlier in the year on Massachusetts. Everyone is freaking out about the market there. Their prices are still much, much higher. But they're actually leveling off in a way, their volume of sales isn't able to compete with their decline in prices. And so their actual total value of their market's not increasing in the same way Michigan is. So, even as your prices are really low, consumers are reacting to that by just buying more cannabis, which is great. What we want to see is that some of that price elasticity of demand, where those consumers, still have additional budget that they want to spend on regulated cannabis. And as those prices drop, they're doing so. So, I think we'll probably see some of that rebound a little bit. Wholesale prices in Colorado hit their kind of minimum at about $700 a pound. And also kind of are hitting their minimum at, about $3 and a quarter or so. So I would not expect prices on the retail side to go much lower than they are now. I really don't think there is the margin for them to go lower. And so as you can see, there's a little bit of a rebound since the beginning of the year on flower prices. And hopefully that will continue a bit, and we'll probably settle somewhere, between that $4 a gram or so, which is quite cheap. These are probably also pre-tax prices, but it's not really clear when it comes to the data provided by the state. That's something.
Sure. And Andrew, just to help us kind of understand the slide here, are those numbers from Colorado, Massachusetts, and Oregon kind of at the same time period?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked at averages since the beginning of the year. So that's comparison prices. Again, I think I accidentally cut it out. Those are comparison prices average since the beginning of 2023.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Let's talk a little bit about supply and demand. Just showing a little bit of the reality that yes, as certain prices decline, demand increases in terms of volume. And some of this is there's weird changes in the volume that occurs, and so obviously we then have some prices change because the prices here are just determined based upon the total value of cannabis that's sold and the volume of that cannabis. So you can see here, as flowers decline and then come back up, what we're seeing is that volume is more than compensating for it. And that more than compensating volume is what is resulting in the total market in Michigan continuing to grow at an even faster rate than it has been historically. That again, when we were talking about the slide at the beginning of the presentation about, where are we at when it comes to the comparison to the linear trend, right? Essentially Michigan's market right now is increasing at an increasing rate. And that's occurring because the volume of demand is increasing faster than some of those price declines. Also because, what you can see here is that some of those prices that, hit a minimum at the beginning of 2023 are rebounding a little bit. But sales are continuing to increase in volume. So even as prices are ticking up a little bit, we are still seeing that volume increase. And that's also because, while prices are increasing, they're still below $4 a gram. And so things are still cheap, right? Things are still cheap, but we're not seeing a catastrophic decline in prices in the way we may have been worried about in the second half of 2022. So it's great to see that we're leveling off. Again, this is our kind of healthy market. Yes, things are really slim. Margins are really tight, which does mean that you have to find those efficiencies, in your business operations, get your standard operating procedures compliant and lean, so that you can make sure to gain your profits wherever possible, and hopefully we'll get scheduling reform, which will eliminate 280E, and that will lighten the load a little bit for everyone, and kind of realize some of those profits. But even though things are lean, it's kind of lean and healthy. Things aren't driving off of a cliff in a way that we may have been worried about, as I mentioned, at the end of 2022 with regards to prices.
I think it's important too to take Michigan data in the context of the greater kind of cannabis market throughout the United States as well. We saw those same challenges and dips pretty much across the board, not just in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. And that a lot is occurred because of just changing consumer behaviors as we emerged from the pandemic, right? So during the pandemic, everyone was at home, and there's not much to do at home if you can't go out to dinner or can't go out to festivals. And so what a lot of people were doing were making sourdough, drinking beer, and making mixed drinks, and smoking weed and watching Netflix, right? All of those things go great together. And so once people are essentially buying more cannabis because they're staying at home, and they couldn't spend their money on experiential goods. So if the best experience you can have is watching movies with your partner at home, why not smoke some weed when you do it? And so as we've transitioned out of that, people are kind of rebalancing their consumer taste and preferences across this consumer packaged goods, which cannabis is part of it, to kind of experiential and consumer packaged goods. So, going out to restaurants more, going out to movies more, going out to, all these, concerts and venues and all these sorts of things. And with that, we've kind of seen some of that rebalancing, plus inflation kind of cut into consumers' capacity for spending, because everything else, in the supermarket is so much more expensive. So that really diminished a bit of demand across the country. But what we're seeing is that didn't impact Michigan as much because you're still in your growth phase. So where, Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington saw actual declines in total sales, Michigan's still in the growth phase and still doing well. Maybe had some slowdown of what would have been otherwise, but still growing at a healthy point. Let's talk for a second about retail licenses across the state. So I love this graph. I love that I didn't have to put it together, that Michigan did it for me. I had to do this for Massachusetts. It's a lot of work. So here we can see the clustering of retail licenses across the state. Travis had provided for the September numbers, which I think just came out yesterday.
Or something, just a few days ago. Yeah,
a few days ago. So as of August, Michigan had about 716 stores, and the number of retailers grew 147 in the last 12 months. These stores are spread out across almost the entire state, with the only exception of some what I would imagine is really rural areas of the western Upper Peninsula, and for some reason there's nothing in the thumb. So Travis, what is that? Is that a really rural area, or they banned it, or why is there nothing in the thumb?
In a lot of cases, it's a combination of both. I mean, a lot of the kind of clustering you're seeing on this map is in primarily our largest population centers. Obviously, you can kind of see the largest cluster surrounding Detroit. A lot of these markets with more retail stores than others are also like places historically where cannabis was allowed to kind of thrive a bit faster on the medical side of things, that transitioned into adult use faster. Clearly, you're seeing some border clustering as well on our Ohio and Indiana borders in the south. To a lesser extent, that also occurs in the Upper Peninsula on that Wisconsin border, but there's just so many less people up there. And, while there is some lovely parts of the country in the thumb and kind of north of M10, we just don't have a lot of population in those areas. It's pretty rural in a lot of that part of the state. And I tell a lot of my out-of-state clients and out-of-state folks looking to Michigan, you kind of make a box between like Grand Rapids, Bay City, Detroit, Kalamazoo, and on those highways, that's where almost all our largest population centers are going to be found. And you see the retail stores kind of marketing to them. So.
Got it. And when people go up to go on vacation, as a not someone who's a Michigan resident, where do they mainly travel to? Are they going up to Traverse City and up to the Upper Peninsula, or is it people don't really travel as much up to the thumb, or kind of where does the population
There's
within
some good
Michigan move?
travel there. I'm honestly not sure why some of that region doesn't have at least a few stores kind of popping up on the map. Historically, a lot of those areas are probably like less open to cannabis or and things, and I'm sure you'll start seeing some of that come. But a lot of the larger towns kind of in those regions are closer to I-75, which is where you're seeing those clusters, in like Bay City and some of those regions along the thumb. And then, Michigan is a huge tourism state. I think you'll find that very, very popular tourist destinations all along the coast of Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, up into the UP. But Traverse City is probably the big one up north. To a lesser degree, that Mackinac Bridge, Mackinac Island area gets a lot of travel as well. And there's a bunch of snowmobiling, fishing, hunting kind of in the middle sections of our state as well.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's, even that being said, we have a lot of businesses really across the state. And it's still increasing. And I think we're seeing licenses increase in many different areas of the state. We'd have to, delve a little bit deeper into that to kind of see kind of where those increases are happening over time. But I think Michigan can absorb some more retail stores, given how large the state is both geographically and the population. But things are pretty good for access right now.
Yeah, I think I was talking to some clients who have quite a few retail stores kind of scattered around. And we were looking at the market and some areas they wanted to target for future expansion. And, if you're in the retail side of things and you're doing delivery, there really are very few parts of Michigan where it would be difficult to get your cannabis retail delivery right now. And obviously there's a whole bunch of places if you're from a smaller town like where I grew up and things. But a lot of our population centers, even if you don't want to have that traditional, show up to the storefront experience, if you're fortunate enough to live where your residence says on your ID, you can get a lot of cannabis service to you, even in some of these communities where they haven't adopted retail stores and allowing those stores in your jurisdiction. So I think you'll find too that there's quite a few of our kind of retail clusters in these like Grand Rapids, Detroit, areas that you're seeing on the map where a lot of the sales that they're performing, are delivery sales even to parts of the market that don't have the blue dot here on the map as well.
Yeah, and it is, amazing. You see so many stores in the Detroit metro area. Even though the city of Detroit has had its issues in licensing, which is just, showing that thankfully there's lots of other jurisdictions in and around, the city of Detroit itself that have been able to kind of fill some of that need from those that live in the metro area.
Yeah, we could do another webinar on what happened in Detroit. It's unfortunately quite sad that their market kind of got dispersed out to the suburbs around them. But even still, you could see such a large cluster. That is where probably I would argue the vast majority of people in Michigan live are in that greater Detroit area. And you'll see there's quite a few stores servicing them. A lot of the markets that are creating new retail license opportunities are kind of in that greater Detroit area too. There's several jurisdictions that we're active on application processing right now, clustering around there. But there's new markets turning online at the municipality level, pretty much all over the state right now, and I expect more to come next year as well.
Awesome. So let's shift for a second to retailer supply and demand. So when we look at this again, right, sales per retailer, and the harvested plants. And so, what I wanted to really show is that sales per retailer has actually been increasing, right? What we are likely to see, and this is, in our projections for 2023 compared to 2022 and 2021, the average retailer is going to make more in the value of sales than they did previously, which is truly amazing and not what we're seeing in most other states. Or in most other states, essentially you're adding more and more retailers, and that's just cutting into what those average sales are. But essentially sales are increasing at a faster pace than the number of retailers being licensed. And so that is why, we are seeing kind of that continued uptick. It's not crazy. On average, retailers are making less than 5 million a year. But even with those seasonal supply shocks with harvest, we're not seeing prices decline to such an extent that retailers are really suffering more than they were previously. And so hopefully these trends will occur, that total sales will continue to increase at slightly higher pace than we are seeing for those sales per retailer. But again, this is healthy. This is not what I would expect. But it's great to see that consumers in Michigan are transferring their purchases from the illicit market over to the legal market, in such a way that the retailers are doing better on average than they were previously. Now, this is not every single retailer. Obviously there are some areas, if you're in a mid-sized market and you were one of 4 businesses and now you're one of 8 businesses, it's going to be harder. That essentially your pie is getting split up into more different pieces. But on average across the state, things are good and healthy as far as average sales per retailer. When I looked at this in Massachusetts, it's been a pretty steady, although stable still, decline over time. And that's because, they had a point at which, retailers are making over 10 million early in the year, so early in their program. That never really occurred in Michigan because you had more licensees early on. And so, you hadn't seen that same sort of decline. So again, Michigan retailers are used to lean operations. And so hopefully this increase in average sales per retailer will help that bottom line.
Yeah. And, one of the questions we kind of presented in our prompt for this whole webinar was, is now a good time to enter the Michigan? I think it's data like this that you'd want to look at if you're kind of looking at Michigan in a broad stroke. Like if you want to invest or participate in retail license opportunity, this is the type of market where there's capacity for that. Versus you can kind of look at other markets where there's kind of a piling on as we push things down. And I kind of wanted to just mention that as we try to answer one of the on-point questions here from Rich again. He's asking, are there population areas where retail sales per month are lower compared to other parts of the state? Rich, unfortunately, a lot of the data get in Michigan, while very useful, isn't always as specific as we would want it to be. We can make some really educated guesses to kind of help give you some I don't believe we get data that specific.
We don't have we don't have geographic data. That's something we can ask the state for. See if they'd be willing to break it out by county, sales by county, as we've seen occur in some other states. Colorado, for instance, provides county level sales. So, if we can get them to provide that, we can absolutely analyze this. But right now, everything is just at the state level. We have patient numbers at a county level, but not the same level of detail there in terms of the value or volume of sales.
Yeah, a lot of this data that's getting put together by the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, we've spoken to them before as we've kind of over the years tried to put data presentations together. It does take their staff quite a bit of time to compile the data and to put it in a presentable form and to ensure it's accurate. And while it would be amazing to get even more, a lot of the data we're getting and the data we're going to get in the future is coming from our state regulators kind of also maturing as our market expands too. They're learning what data matters to them from their enforcement and compliance priorities, and they've been very open and willing to be helpful sharing data, but someone at the state needs to put the time in to collect and present that data, and we're just not seeing that yet. So.
Yeah, part of the reason I only show the inventory accumulation data over the last year or two is that at the beginning of the program they didn't provide that. So that inventory accumulation data is really interesting as far as kind of what is happening behind the scenes that's going to affect those retail prices. So hopefully, as we mature, we can do that. Also, if they want to start presenting it in a CSV or Excel file, it's just gonna be way easier than the PDFs are doing now. But it gives me a job.
We have asked for that. I think we were politely told not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Rich. All right, let's get to our last slide and talk a little bit about the conclusion as we wrap up and if anyone else, has questions. So, while Michigan flower prices are amongst the lowest in the country, the data shows that the price decline has stabilized. So, yay, things are no longer declining at the same rate. And, even with that, the value of products and the volume of products still continues to increase. So, again, that's really nice. It's been slight, so it's not crazy. It's not like prices are rebounding in a huge way. But they're no longer declining. So the bleeding has stemmed. And the increasing volume of sales in every product category more than compensates for the decline in prices. So again, the market continues to expand both in volume and value. As I've reiterated 1.5 million times, this is a great sign as far as health, right? When you start to see a market decline in the total value of sales because demand isn't keeping up with the decline in prices, what you see there is, we've essentially gotten to the point in which a decline in prices just isn't inducing more demand. And that could be because consumers have all the cannabis they would need and they don't need more. And they're not going to necessarily just buy more because there's more available. Or it could be happening in a place like Massachusetts because there still needs to be more stores and access points in certain areas of the state. And so people aren't able to actualize that demand because it's still too much of a hassle to go to stores, right? Another thing we're seeing, Michigan's adult use market is projected to surpass $3 billion in sales, which is more than a 50% increase from 2022. That is amazing, right? The 40 to 60% year-over-year increases. It's what you often see in the first 2 years of a program, 2 to 3 years of a program. We are now in, what is this, the fourth year, really kind of the fourth year of the program, 2020, 21, 22, 23. And so, we're still continuing to see this increase, through a period of time that I thought it would have tapered off already. So again, great signs. Now, that being said, I think probably in 2024, demand is going to taper down, right? Like, how much of a market can Michigan expand to? I would be surprised if we hit 4 billion. 3.5 would be amazing. So we'll yet to see kind of how that continues to expand. Again, because the state has covered so many of its population areas. And so while things are great now, we should prepare for the market to start to stabilize, or, to start to stabilize and demand to, maybe not continue to increase at the same rate it has previously over the next 18 months. And even as the number of these... Go for it, Chucks.
Oh, sorry, please. I was going to say too, just to kind of add some context too. I do think like a lot of Michigan success comes from a few factors. While we do have like unlimited state licensing and favorable like tax structures, reasonable rules and regulations to operate, we do benefit from having some pretty favorable border conditions. Wisconsin and Indiana don't really have any cannabis at all. We have very competitive pricing versus Illinois. I think Ohio is going to be shifting that to, a lot of our sales, are coming from some of those regions of the state along the border there, even up into places like where my office is in Ann Arbor in the Detroit area. I know they get a lot of that type of tourism, market as well. We have really high sales per resident, high per capita sales. So, if you're thinking about like where those numbers are coming from, you should probably be assuming that some of that is from our, out of into the state. But as we shift from like new market to young maturing market, we're seeing stabilization in the market. We're also seeing a lot of those companies that were some of the initial movers go through consolidation, kind of downsizing. Some are shutting down, some are overextending into financial receivership. We're going to see additional adjustments. It's going to be a process, but I think all the data we're seeing is very optimistic.
I think that actually leads great into Rich's next question, which is, in your opinion, what's the best platform for selling or buying cannabis businesses or select assets from a business? I'm not one of the ones that brokers this on the ground. So Travis, it's really a question for you.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. So, I think that's kind of been locally market as well. I see, I probably see a lot more of the like, brick and mortar in-person just in what I do from day to day. But a lot of my clients, are getting a lot of online sales and delivery sales, pushing quite a bit of their kind of overall revenue. And there's great both private and third party platforms people are using from the consumer side to market out to their consumers, and there's a lot of kind of business to business kind of facilitation going on there as well. I don't know if I captured your question.
Yeah, so you say probably local brokers. It's still
there's a lot.
It's not really a platform per se. It's probably mostly business brokers.
Yeah, a lot of my clients are kind of like been in the industry through medical and are more or less have worked with other industry stakeholders for several years now. Even if the adult use side of things is kind of taking over, a lot of those same voices and faces are still there. It's and then regionally, a lot of the stores in this Ann Arbor area have like this network of wholesales and processors that are servicing it, that certainly could and likely does interact with other regions of the state, but you'll just find through proximity that like kind of the market interactions kind of in this region of Michigan are probably quite different and nuanced compared to like the Grand Rapids market or the other parts of the Detroit markets and things too. It's really quite specific. So it's kind of a question to answer.
Yeah.
I know that we lost kind of time here. We also had a question about like pricing for Michigan licensure early on.
Yeah.
That's hard to say too, because for very similar reasons. I could give you quotes and estimates for what it costs to get from the middle of the process towards operations, but because a lot of our licensing opportunities, especially for retailers, are kind of driven by the local municipality opportunity, you're seeing 3 to 5 licenses available for 10 to 15 applicants in each municipality, which really has a huge factor on kind of what your estimate's going to be for the cost of opening retail stores. To a lesser degree, you're not seeing that competition in other license types, but it's hard to say.
What are they selling for? What are licenses like? Let's say a retail license that's fully built
recently, we saw some pretty huge price tags as they were changing hands in 2020 and 2021. The last few retail stores transactions I've seen have been, $500,000 less. It really depends on how viable that asset is in your kind of ecosystem. If you're in like a base city dispensary license where there's just so many of them in a small region, your price tag for that transaction is going to be way lower than if you're kind of in a more rural area where there's no one around you for 50 miles. It's a very profitable store. A border town store is going to go way higher, 4 or 5, versus $250,000 if you're in kind of a smaller, more lean operation. So it really does kind of go across the board. It's a dynamic that you almost have to look at a little bit more locally than at a state level, in my experience.
Well, thanks, Travis, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar. This has been a pleasure. It's always nice to jump into a state that provides good data and provide that information to those who are interested. If you have any questions about Michigan, please feel free to reach out to Travis and I. If you're looking to analyze cannabis markets in Michigan or include any of this data in presentations, always happy to help you with your pitch decks. And if you're looking at other states, as I mentioned, I do this really across the country, analyzing public data on cannabis markets, anywhere where it exists. So thank you so much, Travis, for joining me today as we talked a little deeper about opportunities in Michigan. And thankfully it's a positive note. You were able to say that while the market is lean, things are increasing and we'll continue to have bright and sunny days into the Michigan market in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. Thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.